If you were allowed to change one thing in Tarkov right now, what would that one thing be? It's a loaded question, I know, but this has been brewing in my mind for a couple of days now. Tarkov has so many different mechanics, ideas, and concepts thrown into it that asking someone to change one of those feels kind of unfair. Over the years, BSG has only added more and more to their game, and while those additions are usually interesting once they get the implementation correct, when you look at the game from a bird's eye view, it can feel daunting with how much content is actually in the game, and from that angle, there is an overwhelming amount of possibilities and potential to change how Tarkov plays in one area or another. You could completely adjust how weapon functions with the ergonomics and recoil, you could change the medical system, you remove features you don't like, maybe something akin to Found in Raid. The possibilities are truly endless, so today I wanted to go over a handful of features or mechanics I would change within Tarkov and go over why I would change them, and then maybe at the end of the list pick one that has the most potential positive impact for the entire gaming community of Tarkov. It's funny, I had so many ideas in my head for the weeks that I was thinking about doing this video, but I never wrote them down, so now I'm sitting down to write this and I'm drawing a blank. I suppose I could start light and say I would just like to change how the traders work, and by that I mean smooth out the progression curve in terms of how you acquire gear. Maybe this is removing stuff from their inventories so it's not as bloated. Maybe it's a 5th loyalty level so we can space out the gear that we do have so it feels a little bit more natural. I'm not exactly sure what solution would be most effective, but something to make it so that hitting level 15 doesn't just solve all of our problems, because once most of the traders are level 2, the game just gets so much easier, and it's unfortunate that it's been that way for as long as it has been. The flea market, to be honest, plays a huge factor in this role, so another idea to change the game would just be to remove it outright and just see what happens. I've always been curious what modern Tarkov would feel like without the flea. With so many items and new ways to make money, by getting rid of that instant gratification, this too could also help smooth out the curve for people's progression. I know people really like the flea, but again, this is just a thought idea, so it's not going to happen. Now, getting rid of the fleet, again, the traders would need a huge overhaul as well, but these changes kind of go hand in hand, and you can't really change one without the other. So I guess we could call it a blanket economy overhaul. Instead of splitting the changes between the vendors and the flea, bundle them into one big adjustment and work on them together, because they kind of are tied at the hip, and if one changes or is removed, the other needs to be looked at as well, otherwise you'll have massive balancing issues like we currently do. But besides the economy changes, another issue I'd love to fix is the AI, and by that I mean make them more intelligent, use callouts, have smoother difficulty scaling based on maybe the map you're playing or the average level of PMCs in that raid, and just make fighting them a more interesting experience. Instead of them just standing out in the open in only a few fixed locations, make encountering scavs, raiders, and bosses and the like much more of a dynamic experience. Some level of tactics and intelligence would just make exploring the map so much more interesting, because at this point, AI are kind of just blips on the radar and not much more. But this also works in the opposite direction, fixing the boss AI instead of them just being hacking aimbot users. The goons are the best example. Instead of them just beaming you from over 500 meters, let them actually use their radios like their flavor text suggests that they do, but in reality isn't a thing. Give them dynamic situations where they might begin an engagement, but if they feel as though they can't get you, they retreat and set up an ambush somewhere. Fights would be cool if guards really tried to cover their boss, even going so far as dying for them and getting in the way specifically just so their boss doesn't die. The best examples of these would either be Reshala or Gluhar, just because they have so many guards that it can sometimes feel like that happens in general, but throwing grenades, suppressing fire down hallways while a guard escorts the boss out of the back of a building, it would be so interesting to witness and experience these more compelling and engaging fights where I need to think about how I approach and whether I should get in there and play aggressive or back up and maybe go for a flank. So again, something I would personally love to improve if I had the chance and knowledge to do so would just be completely overhauling how the AI works in the game. Another potential change would be to entice players to build weapons from scratch. This is a difficult one to explain because technically we can already do that, but what I mean is having to find more of the parts for a weapon in the world, making them common enough that people would be interested in having to find all the parts for an M4 or something like the rarer options in the game, the SIG Spear. There is no way to obtain that weapon's lower receiver unless you just buy it and dismantle it. Make all the weapon lower receivers in the world, or even better, move some of the more interesting and sought after weapons to the workbench. It still baffles me that we only have 2 different AK crafts, but not a single M4 craft in the workbench. It could be as easy as an M4 handguard, a buttstock, and a bunch of weapon parts. Just a stock M4 ready to be modified to whatever your heart wants. Encouraging crafting weapons or building them from the ground up is so much more aligned to something like Stalker, where you might find an awesome weapon on an enemy faction, but because the durability is so low, you need to find compatible parts to rebuild that weapon and make it fully yours. It's one of my favorite gameplay loops in those open sandbox games. And maybe the final change I can immediately think of would be to drastically increase raid timers and allow for people to join raids that are already in progress. It would be a Herculean task to accomplish, but imagine raids being 2 hours long and you join after 45 minutes have passed. You don't know where anyone is, if the looter on the map is still there or has it replenished, is the boss dead or has an AI faction rolled in to clean up the stragglers. That level of uneasiness and unfamiliarity is something that is lost to time the longer you play Tarkov, and not knowing for sure how many people are roaming around will always keep you on edge regardless of how close you are to an extract. It would also allow plenty of opportunities for world events if this is something BSG wants to pursue, like airdrops, but maybe even more serious ones like mortar strikes that require you to find shelter, otherwise you risk dying to the explosion. Anything that gets people out of their funk of autopiloting to gunshots because they're so deep into the wipe that the only way they feel engaged with Tarkov is fighting other players, which, hey, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking them because I can be that way as well, but other mechanics built into the game to mitigate these feelings would go a really long way, and a lot of players would appreciate it. Out of all the options I laid in this video, I'm unsure which one sounds the most enticing that I would want fully implemented into the game. I think in the short term, making massive improvements to the AI would make a lot of people really happy that they finally feel like the scavs, the raiders, rogues, bosses, and goons feel like a fair challenge instead of having to pixel perfect peek them so they don't get instantly one-tapped by their gross aim. But any of these changes would make me happy and wanting to play Tarkov more than I currently do. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. Let me know in the comments down below if any of these changes interest you, or if you have a change that you would like to see be implemented, please sound off down below. And be sure to subscribe for more videos about a wish list of mechanics that will ultimately never be added into the game. I hope to see you in future ones.